Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Today, I'll be going over Jiaoqiu again and perhaps help clarify how the version 5 changes directly impacted characters like Acheron, while also explaining why he is much better than Guan and Pela in practice. As such, I'll be dividing this video into two parts. If you want to know how Jiaoqiu and his kit is, I implore you to watch my previous video going over it. I will start with the Pela and Guan comparison, as many are saying he's just slightly better, if not even worse, than his 4-star counterparts. But firstly, let's look at my updated chart because my previous one was wrong. Sorry about that. I calculated his signature wrong and missed out on an additional 10% vulnerability. Now, with max uptime compared to Pela, his E1S1 is around 20% better than Pela, excluding ults where it would be 35% better, not just 10 to 15% better, while E0S5 resolution is still only around 10% better. Guan actually benefits a lot from his signature light cone and can now in theory be better than Pela, with her just being only around 10 to 25% worse than Jiaoqiu. Future you here, I'm just gonna make a quick comparison on Jiaoqiu and Ruan Mei if they're both E1S1. I'm just doing this because previously I messed up on my video in regards to chart, but this actually does change the outcome. So if both were at equal investment at E1S1, Jiaoqiu would in theory actually slightly outperform Ruan Mei in regards to damage. This is excluding utility, but when looking at the numbers, as you can see, Jiaoqiu's is actually slightly lower, which wouldn't necessarily make sense, but we actually have to take in consideration the fact that Ruan Mei's ult with the defense pen isn't 100%, is actually only active 2/3 of the time. So yeah, back to the video. But how does this hold in practice? TLDR, it is nowhere as good due to uptime, and I'll explain simply in pure fiction where the issue is most glaring using Pela. I will be using my GUI to replicate how an Acheron would function, but regardless, the points I'm gonna make will still stand for every other character. So the first point is, why is uptime important when Acheron's ult is the biggest part? So why not just time the ults together? This is valid, but isn't necessarily good for two reasons. One, sitting on say Pela ult means you're probably overcapping on energy for quite some time, also thus generating less theoretical stacks. B, this negligible downtime can actually be the difference of a character's skill, such as Acheron's and Jingyuan's skill, killing a few enemies in pure fiction. This downtime is really bad in pure fiction for every nihility unit besides Jiaoqiu for their own respective reasons, but it's not too bad in MOC, which I will get to. Looking at this gameplay, we can see that Pela ulted turn 1 on wave 1. It also looks like it generally takes around 1 to 2 waves to get back to her ult. This means that generally, this is a 50% uptime, meaning that the 45% damage buff, if divided by half, is only around 27.5%. But take a closer look. Even when there's a new wave, sometimes not every enemy gets debuffed because they get killed and a new one spawns in. So taking that into account as well, it's even worse. I will say Pela is actually still pretty good in pure fiction due to her trace which grants energy when enemies die. Guan, on the other hand, in pure fiction, generally will only have 1 to 2 stacks of Fire Kiss, as the stacks do not transfer, which is not good. As you can see, uptime really is that important. And again, Jiaoqiu does not have this issue at all if you're playing him right. Anyways, let's go to MOC, where it's not too big of an issue but can still be a big difference in certain scenarios. I will use Pela to demonstrate this part to be fair and not Guan. I will say while using Guan, I generally was only able to get 1-2 stacks in MOC 10 and sometimes 3. But the fact that you can't increase the stacks via her kit really sucks, as you have to wait on the enemy for the stacks to build up, which enemies generally would only act around 2 times per wave. This means that if you're killing stuff pretty well, you generally only get 2 to 3 stacks, so only around a 30% damage increase, when I was using her with resolution at least. I will say my Pela gameplay in the background did have 100% uptime because I was playing it pretty well and had some nice RNG though. So rather, I'll just draw instances where you lose uptime even with Pela. The most common is if your Pela is not fast enough and is getting lapped by enemies. As such, while it'll take her 3 turns to ult, the enemies would have already acted twice, in which your debuff is down for a turn. The next is when you go to the next wave and all enemies are fresh and don't have any debuffs. Fairly often, you'll have used her ult on the previous wave to get enough damage to kill the final enemies, and as such, you may take up to 2 to 3 more turns on a new wave before getting your ult up again. And lastly, just like point 2, when a boss is taken to their second phase, they reset all debuffs. As such, you can potentially not have Pela ult when that happens and as such lose out on a damage window. Using Jiaoqiu, it is a tight window at times and straight up will use 2 skills without having Pela ult up at times. And to summarize, debuff uptime is super important. So, I'll now explain how the version 5 impacted Acheron and people named not Acheron. The main point of contention is the ult change, where the automatic Ashen Roast application can be triggered 6 times. Casting Ultimate resets the number of remaining triggers. So, starting with other people named not Acheron, how does this actually impact you? I will be using Paint to explain. So, let me explain the gameplay cycle with Jiaoqiu first. He first casts his technique and spawns in, with all enemies getting 1 stack. Now, he can skill and go right into ult. At this point, enemies have 3 stacks of Ashen Roast and you still have 4 triggers left of this Ashen Roast, with 2 of them going to waste. Regardless, you will have to generally wait for 2 enemy turns for max Ashen Roast for the entire rest of the game, as long as you can keep up the ult. It is a 100 cost ult, and I promise, it is not too hard to get. You can also 2-turn ult with the right setup if you really wanted to do that. Regardless, how does that impact you if you don't have Acheron? Nothing. It did absolutely nothing. The argument was that it would keep infinitely refreshing, which is cool, but that's dependent on the ult being up, just like how it is now. How does the ult get up? By you skilling once or twice and doing basic once or twice. And guess what? Nothing changed. Because it never infinitely refreshed, because it was dependent on the ult being up. Side note, he is better than Ruan Mei in Dot. I will link to a person on Reddit explaining that. Now for people named Acheron, this will be primarily pure fiction based as it's more prevalent there as it can exacerbate his stack limit issue. By looking how bad it could be in the worst case scenario, we can get an idea for everything else that isn't as unfavorable to Jiaoqiu and his stacks for Acheron. I will not be talking about solitary healing as this person mentioned, where you can potentially 1 to 2-turn ult in theory, thus solving a stack limit issue for Acheron. So, clarifying the version 5 change again for Acheron mains, Jiaoqiu's Ashen Roast debuff will essentially be permanently up, so this is the vulnerability. But you would only get 6 stacks for Acheron per Jiaoqiu ult, which you get per enemy turn until you refresh. So in practice, how many stacks would you have lost due to version 5 changes in pure fiction? The issue is that it can greatly vary, but it comes down to 3 main factors. 1. How fast do you kill your enemies? If you keep killing the enemies so quickly and it's just never their turn, you'll never gain any Acheron stacks from Jiaoqiu's ult, allowing him to keep getting his ult back in time to refresh stacks if it's ever needed. Also, if Jiaoqiu's Ashen Roast manages to kill an enemy on their turn due to the dot, you will not get an Ashen Roast stack, or Acheron stack. I can't show the video as it got taken down. As such, if you cannot kill fast enough to clear enemies and the waves, your stacks will disappear in essentially a wave and a half. 2. How fast is the enemy and do they action advance? As we know, his stacks and as such Acheron stacks are dependent on enemies taking their turn. So if it's the dot modifier action advancing everyone, this will consume a lot of his stacks super early. But in the gameplay that will link, the creator killed super well to a point where the action advance modifier still didn't really consume his stacks, with them losing hardly any stacks from version 3 to a in theory version 5 Jiaoqiu. By the way, you can definitely make this work in your favor as you can get stacks faster and earlier. Lastly, it comes down to you playing it right and if you want to save the stacks. This is also going to be a pure fiction tip to minimize damage taken. But essentially, if you have ults, make sure to time them when there's not a lot of room in the action bar. As you can see, here with us being very far down in the action bar as we just spawned in, killing the enemies instantly make them spawn before us even though we are much faster. In practice and during the actual game, when there's a group of enemies going before you and there's a gap, let the gap close first before ulting. If not, the enemies you just killed would instantly be replaced in a bar, and rather being sent all the way back, it's like they never died. I'll link 2 gameplays of Jiaoqiu and Acheron in the description. 1. Compare him and Pela in Pure Fiction and MOC in post version 5. It's a really nice video and can inform you better on the topic and whether you want to pull JQ or not. The second video will answer the question on how many stacks less would JQ have gotten due to the version 5 changes. But basically, we can simply count the Acheron row stacks in total as pre-version 5 and then stop counting when it reaches the 6 stack until the creator ults again. I also started counting from his third ult and at the start of the second wave as to not include the energy gumball machines. On the third wave, I'll list the amount of stacks before the creator refreshed the ult. 4, 6, 4, 3, 2. As you can see, the creator only hit the cap once in the final wave with plenty of stacks remaining to spare. Do note the creator did use tutorial light cone, but in this case would not have really changed the result much. Regardless, the creator still got 26 Acheron stacks pre-version 5 and 21 stacks post-version 5. Keep in mind this was a pure fiction which kept action advancing enemies. So my personal conclusion is that this nerf was not too harsh for Acheron players in pure fiction, and even less so in other content. And that's all. I hope this cleared up some confusion regarding JQ, and if you have any comments or just want to discuss stuff in general, feel free to use the comment section and I'll try to respond when I wake up. I just ask you to try to keep it civil and respectful, and if you have a comment or a critique, I would just ask you to provide your reasoning as to let people talk it out with their viewpoints and perspectives. Saying he sucks or he's mid, you can't really build off of that. At the end of the day, we all just want to have fun and enjoy the new characters, so let's just keep that in mind and don't be a dick. Bye.